Good late morning. How's everybody? Good? All right, I promise to be brief. I'm going to kind of use the slides as sort of a conversation starter. I'm going to cover really three topics related to the subject up here, obviously, which you'll see if I can work this thing. Cloud workflows in the real world. I'm going to talk about sort of generically experiences our customers are having and give you some real world insight to what's working, what's not working, where the pitfalls are, what to think about. I don't have a dog in this fight other than we're happy to help our customers make sure that they can make their magic, whether that's visual effects, post-production, et cetera, in the cloud and make their customers happy ultimately. So feel free to raise your hand, shout out at me anytime. If you want to ask questions, I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. I'd rather have this be an interactive session since I've already seen all these slides and having me just drone on and on and on at you, okay? And I'll be available afterwards at lunch, assuming lunch is free. Lunch is free, right, Eric? All right, then I'll stay for lunch. All right, so let's get the corny jokes out of the way, all right? We've all seen how corny the cloud jokes can be. But what's real about the cloud is the lay of the land. So when you think about this, no one's going to the cloud because it's fun. No one's going to the cloud because they think it's less painful than what they're currently doing. They're doing it because they're out of capacity, most likely, right? And that is, at least in the experience we've seen with our customers, that is the number one reason why somebody finally goes over that pain threshold to try something in the cloud, whether that's storage in the cloud or rendering in the cloud or any other workflow in the cloud. It tends to be they're very comfortable because of the generation we've all grown up in so far. They're very comfortable working with their own data centers and the people that they know and the systems that they know, and something pushes them over a threshold. And it's a pain level typically around capacity, okay? And I'll talk through these key points in this deck. Just real quick, who are we? We have about 400 customers. We think of us essentially as a large private network for the production, post-production industry, visual effects, et cetera. So we end up seeing a lot of these things. We work very closely with Google, who's gracious enough to host this seminar. We also work with Amazon and SoftLayer in terms of cloud as well. So where does that pain come from? First of all, time. Every one of our collective customers in this industry, whether they're a production, they're the studio, they're the guys working the visual effects shot on behalf of those people, they're all always running short on time, right? The files keep getting bigger, right? 2K, everyone was wondering when 1K was going to go to 2K, and then it suddenly went to 4K. And I don't know what your worlds are like, but ours, we see a lot of customers who are shooting in 6K because there are cameras that shoot in 6K, and I'm sure that the old adage of let's fix it in post is being used more and more. So they're capturing a lot more data. We see on average a 2K camera workflow on set sending about a terabyte a day back through our network. When they go to 4K, no surprise, we're hitting about 4 times that amount, and 6K is even worse, no surprise, right? And that creates bigger bottlenecks for getting your dailies. The other piece we're seeing that's tantamount to this is that productions don't view the world the way they used to, right? So it used to be you're going to shoot your big fancy new movie in Pinewood in the UK, right, because of all the history behind it. It's a great location. So you would immediately go, well, I guess we're going to do dailies at Pinewood. And I guess we're going to do post-production in London because it's a short distance from Pinewood, right? But the world's moved on, and now what we see happening is customers shoot at Pinewood, and they push all the raw elements straight back to the mothership somewhere in this town, and mothership then decides to do dailies with a different vendor locally, and maybe they do post-production in New York, right? So they have the freedom to make the decisions on who they want to work with, how they want to work with them, but that freedom comes with the pain of the size of those files, right? And including the other piece of the pain is cost. So imagine you grew up in London in the mid-1990s building some of the coolest visual effects shots back then. And now it's a really, really big business, right? You're going to go win one of the 5 visual effects on a major movie, which means you're going to have to bring 100 to 200 artists to bear for like 6 to 12 months. Question 1, where am I going to stick all these people? Question 2, where's all the compute power for their workstations going to come from? And question 3, how am I going to render that? On top of the fact that you're still in London, because that's how you attract those young artists. That's where they want to work. But guess what? Real estate's at a premium, right? Power is an issue. If you're doing visual effects today in Vancouver, power is an issue, right? So those are real reasons why people finally get over this pain threshold and go, okay, maybe there's not a better way to do this, but there's got to be a different way that solves my problems. And that's usually how they start this journey. So the cloud is not the next coming of whatever God you pray to. It is not going to solve all things. I think Sean Flynn, about a year and a half ago at a security conference we were all at, said it very aptly. It's a very sexy name for other people's computers, right? And you should know that, right? And all the good and bad things that comes with, right? Moving those files around isn't easy, right? So you got to plan that into your workflow process. It's great to plan out how many render nodes you need, but don't forget you got to put the data in there. You're going to have what you're going to hear called data gravity. So you want to do as much of the work as possible with all the data near the compute power. But at the end of the day, you got to get your shot back. You got to get the results back, right? And of course, keep in mind everyone's in a rush. Because we're on other people's computers, security is different. Good and bad, right? So the good part, I would say, to everybody in the room and everyone in this town, we all think that our own security is top-notch, right? The nice part about using any of the cloud providers is there's a written contract, not an unwritten contract, but a written agreement that says from this point in the stack below, they got it. It is their responsibility. And from this point in the stack above, it's your responsibility, right? So there is a clear, defined, in writing, we got patches, we got vulnerabilities below this level. And you, Mr. Customer, have it above, right? And I would suggest that none of us have that in our internal workflows, right? We have the whole thing, right? But that is different. That is different than the way we are comfortable approaching things. It is different in the way that the MPAA does an audit. It's different in a way that Sean Flynn at Marvel does an audit, okay? Of the 3 cloud providers, our friends who are hosting us are the only ones that I know of that have been approved by Disney to do feature work. Okay, so if you saw that announcement last October, that's a big deal. From what I understand, they spent about a year going through that process trying to get people comfortable with the security model that they have in place, that it isn't what they usually hide behind. As you guys know, they usually say, well, I can't tell you where those servers are, and that's not good enough, right? So they've obviously gotten one major studio comfortable. I would suggest you'll see them going through the process to get the others, and I would suggest that the other major providers, AWS and SoftLayer, will come to the market too. Okay. And the last piece I would say is that, again, this isn't a panacea. It doesn't fix everything. There are some workflows that are better on your own hardware, assuming you have hardware. Okay, obviously, if you're a brand new company, you may want to grow up differently. Okay, but it doesn't solve every problem well. All right, so 3 use cases that I think are working well today that we see customers using a lot. The first one is rendering, and we'll spend a little more time talking about rendering. Okay, we're seeing a lot of rendering workflows for commercials, so for advertising, and we're starting to see it come through for features. Right? I would say in the beginning it was test work, and now we're starting to see sustained render jobs happening. A lot more in London, some in New York, and some in LA. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about project parking. This is the concept of I've just finished some work. I need to put it somewhere because I can't deal with it right now, and then I need to get it back and finish it. So the classic evidence is I have an edit suite. Maybe I have a whole ton of edit suites. Somebody finishes there on a Friday, and I have a different group coming in on Monday. What do I do with all that data? I got to put it somewhere, right? And as much as I'm sure Avid would love to sell you another ISIS to hold it for you, It doesn't make sense to do that for 2 weeks, right? And then DR is the other one. The best workflow, the real world workflow I give you today is I'm shooting on production. I have an insurance company who's looking over my shoulder, and every day I finish the shoot, I make 2 LTO backups. I stick one in a safe on production, and the other one I take to my hotel room or my apartment or my condo or wherever I'm doing, so that if there's a fire at work, I still have something to go back to. Obviously, there are better ways to do that now with the amount of connectivity we have in the world. So just very quickly, on rendering, what I would tell you the biggest pitfall is VPCs, okay? There are a lot of people who can get you connected to any one of these cloud providers, okay? It is not a straightforward science to create a sustained burst for your workflow, okay? Amazon tends to take an approach that each VPC is a size of around a gig, okay? Building above a gig is a little bit of a trick. Google has a different workflow. SoftLayer's workflow is different yet again, and I would tell you, we don't see a lot of Azure work today, but Azure's workflow is different again. So step one is, whatever you're going to do, build in some time for the laboratory you're going to have to go through to understand these things, okay? And while we call it magic to avoid this clunkiness, there's just you need some guys who've been around the block to understand how to do the networking side of making this work and get the right people on the phone. The security is important, no surprise. So making sure you're thinking through your security model at both a logical level and a segmenting level, so that you're building a security in layers up front as you render, and again, have that data gravity happening and then bring the data back, right? And I would say that you need to make sure that whoever you're working with, that you can manage changing requirements, all right? It's pretty common for us to see somebody come in and go, hey, I have this much data, I need to do 12,000 cores for a week. And a couple things will happen. 12,000 cores will be too many or too little, right? A week will end up being 2 weeks or 3 days, right? And whatever bandwidth you think it is when you start that process, so maybe it's 3 gigs sustained for a week, suddenly it's 7 gigs for 3 days, or it's 2 gigs for a month. So you need to be prepared to be adaptive, which means as you set this process up in your group, you need to figure out how to change, because every project will be different, okay? And I would suggest that no one wants to be in a business of just paying for peak forever, right? Even though I'm sure every network provider in the world would love to have that business. As we talk about storage, so think about project parking and DR. Every one of the 3 big guys has a different model on egress, all right? Google's model is different than SoftLayer, and it's different than Amazon. I would suggest you spend a lot of time reading the fine print. A lot of time. It's different by region, right? It's different based on where you connect to them. And remember, no matter what you do, if somebody says, I have spare compute capacity or I have spare storage capacity in Taiwan, you might want to check into what the transit cost of getting your data to and from Taiwan is, okay? There's another little asterisk you need to look at, time to first bid on restore, all right? We have a lot of customers who come to us and go, I don't want to pay 3 cents a gig, I want to pay 2 cents a gig. You know, Amazon or Google or SoftLayer, insert a name here, has a better product or cheaper product and it does this. We'll look at the fine print. It's either fewer copies, or it's a change in the way they manage the restore, either because it's coming off a different medium, it's not truly online, or because of policy to keep you from just going to the bottom of the pool on price, they want to retain control your restore. Meaning you should only be putting something that you want to wait 5 hours to restore that is truly archive, truly disaster recovery, right? Not part of your workflow. I would suggest if you show up to work the next morning to look at your shot from yesterday and someone made a mistake and deleted it, waiting 5 hours is probably not going to work for you, assuming you have all your artists sitting around waiting to do their jobs, right? So think that through, right? Know what you're going to pay for up front. Understand the egress fees. The biggest problem I see with productions today, they hate surprises at the end of their project. They absolutely hate getting a giant bill that they didn't budget for, right? So again, think about those things up front. You should know how much data you have to bring back at the end of a project. It's not that hard to calculate. And again, the connectors aren't standardized. When you think about this, most of the applications that still exist out there for whatever workflow you're doing are NFS mounts. They have no concept of object storage, which is at its core an HTTP request, right? A put and a get. So until the applications of the world get smarter, you're probably going to have some connector that's trying to make up for that. You're going to be caching data locally on some appliance and then pushing it to an object storage. Okay? Again, think through that and plan for it. So what do you kind of need? You need guaranteed throughput again, at multiple levels. I would suggest for the security model, you want to touch the internet as little as possible. Frankly, I would tell you, if it were me, you don't want to touch the internet, right? Every time your bits travel on the internet, you just expose yourself to one more layer of attacks, okay? Think through whether you need compute cycles or bare metal. Some of you will be coming from a workflow today where you are in the business of renting machines and having some poor IT guy configure them, setting them all up, and then have a truck come and take them away at the end of 3 months. Bare metal may be a better approach for you, right? To actually just go do that virtually, where you can press a button, spin up 200 machines that look just alike for a day, a week, or a month, right? But it may be better to go through the process and figure out exactly what you need. If you actually just need 32 core capable machines, then just the compute power might be a better story for you, right? Think through how you want to manage caching in that sense. Do you need a VIR? Do you need a VIR appliance or a VIR virtually? Again, think of data gravity. Where do you want the data and that appliance to be, right? Almost every application requires pretty low latency. You can make up for some of that with a VIR and other sort of caching latency appliances. But latency is a big deal. You should definitely be checking latency for however you're going to do it, okay? Again, when that provider calls you and says, I have spare compute capacity in Taiwan, you should ask yourself, what's the latency to get to Taiwan, okay? You want burstable capacity, whether you're doing storage, whether you're doing compute, and how you get your data to and from. You need it to be flexible because I promise you, you won't figure it out. Just like the real productions of the world happen, it's pretty common for all of us to end up with our workflows compressing time at the end, but the ship date hasn't changed, right? So which means you need more of everything at the end. So be prepared for that. Okay, make sure your contracts are flexible, that you understand the cost to burst up and down. I would suggest when you approach this, you should have somebody who is smart enough in all of these things, but you have some trusted providers who are smarter in specific things. Right? You can't do everything. Even though some of you represent very, very large companies, you can't do everything. Right? So have somebody who's smart enough to know who the smarter people are and make sure there's a level of trust that you can work with those, whether they're consultants or whether they're your vendors, but they bring expertise to the table and they can bring repeatable processes to the table to help you get through your workflow. And again, I would tell you today, and it's not pandering to our friends at Google who are doing a great job here, we see a lot of work going to Google right now on the render side, as an example. There's still a decent amount of work that goes to AWS. We see a decent amount going to software. We don't see a huge chunk going to Azure. Again, doesn't mean that our part of the industry reflects the whole industry, but it's a pretty good sample. I think the difference is I think Google has spent the time and energy putting strong sales engineers in place to work through that expertise piece, where if you guys know Amazon, I don't know if anyone is from Amazon in the room, I'm trying to disparage the company, they just have a different approach. Their approach is, look, we have a lot of customers. All of our APIs are very, very, very cleanly described on our website. And if you want to buy help, you can buy help. They just have a different approach, right? So again, back to that question about your expertise. Think through that. If you have some real strong people on your team who don't need all the help, then you may be able to get by just by understanding the APIs and testing your own infrastructure out. My last comment would be experiment now. Okay? I had an experience at HPA Tech Retreat a couple weeks ago where I sat down with a customer on a Tuesday And they said, hey, we're finally ready to try this stuff. Can you help us? I said, absolutely. How fast can you get us live? I said, it's Tuesday. I could easily have you up with significant capacity by Friday. I said, is this your first project? Yes. I said, I don't know, are you comfortable with Google or Software or Amazon? We haven't tried any of them. I was like, whoa, that may be challenging, right? So run the experiment before you have that bottleneck where you're in trouble, right? Some of the sort of savvier VFX companies have already done that. They've actually tested the 3 big providers. They're testing different workflows. They're finding that if they're in New York, some providers do a different job than others. If they're working nightly queues, so there's a pretty common workflow where people sit down and go, hey, I have this much work to do overnight, and I need to put this much out to an external provider for compute power to clear my rendering queue before I wake up in the morning. And they have different experiences based on how those bids work. Some work on a spot price bid, some work on a preemptive bid, right? So get experience with that, right? They have different physical locations, which means different latency. They also have different setup and capacity on what kind of machines and cores they have, et cetera, or storage capability. So again, run your experiments, find out what works best for you, so that when that crunch time comes and your data center is truly out of capacity, you have a sort of a workflow that you understand and trust, and you can just exercise rather than trying to learn on the fly. I promise I'd be brief. I'm happy to take any questions, either now or during our free lunch. Who said there's no free lunch?
All right, we have time for just one quick question before the next presenter. Anybody? Yeah.
Sorry for all the low-tech questions. I'm with New Regency. We have multiple productions on different Sohonet setups all over the place. And we have productions on other ones where you're not located, et cetera. We are working very hard to be working in the cloud because we're all over the place. Our biggest problem is actually just staying connected to the cloud. And can you talk about that at all? I mean,
Sure.
Even if I just came back from Pinewood, I was offline 20 minutes every day. I actually recorded it for 3 weeks. Every
Pinewood,
single
UK,
day.
Pinewood, Atlanta?
Pinewood, UK, London.
Oh, UK.
And at Fox, I'm on the Fox slot. Every day there's a moment at least. I'm just wondering about that.
Well, so it sounds like there's 2 questions. The first question is connectivity. You probably have 3 choices, all right? You can go to somebody like us where what we do is we connect to all the providers in what I would call every major media city. So think of it as like LA, New York, London, but Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Paris, Singapore, Sydney. So if you're one of our customers, you're already connected to our network, we can get you to one of those providers in those major cities. You would have the same sort of capability to go through if you have a data center provider. A lot of the data center companies are connected as well. And your last choice is obviously connecting yourself up, right? Now the challenge with connecting yourself up is the expertise piece, but also you're going to have to connect to a company. So let's pretend you pick Amazon. I'm going to connect to Amazon. Almost everybody who connects you is going to want a 12-month deal, and they're going to want to pin you down on that capacity immediately. You want 1 gig or you want 10 gigs? You're like, I don't know. I'm just experimenting. Well, 12 months, 1 gig is this much. And then if you find out a few months later that Amazon didn't work so well for you, you could obviously do your testing through the internet, would be another way. You're going to find latency and contention on the internet is going to change your experience of those workflows. It might actually change it so bad that you decide you don't want to do it. And then it introduces a security problem as well. So that's kind of my answer to your connectivity pieces, which is you do need to sit down and figure it out. I would suggest if you're doing rendering, you probably have more static locations. You're probably going to do your VFX from a city over time, or your partners are generally located where, of course, productions are moving. I think that's why most of the productions we see today are, as an example, at Pinewood, almost all the productions that we see there trap their data and immediately send it back to the mothership for that reason. So Okay.
Thanks so much, Chuck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Great job.